But there's been a lot to discuss today and more, with news coming out late last night from China, that they have suspended imports from 4 of our largest red meat abattoirs. It's a move that's likely to be seen as a response to calls by the Prime Minister and the broader Morrison government for an inquiry into the origins of this pandemic. Notification of the immediate suspension over labelling and health certificate requirements was big news in Canberra and amongst Australia's beef producers.
It's disappointing that no notification was given prior to that suspension taking effect today. Nonetheless, the government will work with those processes as comprehensively as we can. But the Australian government will treat each issue that comes before us on its merits, and we expect that other governments ought to do likewise.
Sky News political editor Andrew Clennell joins me now out of Canberra. Andrew, this is extraordinary big news. On the red meat front, there's been almost $1 billion increase in our red meat sales into China. They've gone from $137 billion in 2018 to about $2.87 billion this time round. I know, I come from the land myself, huge ramifications for country Australia, for our abattoirs. And, we know we sell red wine there as well. But, I mean, this is one of our biggest Chinese exports. Does anyone think it's anything other than a retaliatory stance by the government?
Well, you ask the government, anyone in the government, including Kieran Gilbert asking Matthias Cormann this afternoon, and they will say it's not retaliation. These things have been in the works for some time, but you have a couple of private conversations around the place and there's concern there'll be a third event. I mean, we've seen one event with the seems as if the barley export market worth $600 million will effectively be shut down to China with a tariff proposal. Simon Birmingham has to respond to the draft report on that. No one's expecting the Chinese to change their minds on that. And now you have 4 meat works taken off the list because of so-called labelling concerns. We've seen retaliatory action from China to other countries along these lines. So. And we've seen that interview with the Chinese ambassador just 2 weeks ago with the Financial Review, where there was suggestion that Chinese people might not want Australian wine or Australian beef anymore. So draw your own conclusions. The government wants to keep a lid on it, but we're not silly. We can see what's going on.
Look, I know a lot of people out in the commercial world will be saying, pull your horns in, government, just acquiesce to China. But the reason we're in this situation with the bully, and China is a bully, it's a bully on many of these issues. We see it with the South China Sea, and obviously we've seen it in this pandemic. The reason we're in a situation like this with the bully is we have kowtowed for too long. I mean, this will be the real test, I think, for Australia, how we manage having a national security or a values disagreement with our near neighbour at the same time as respecting so-called commercial agreements. But there's nothing really commercial when you're dealing with the Chinese state. And we know they couch these things in terms like WTO labelling requirements or adulteration of product, and we saw similar claims in relation to barley. But Blind Freddie knows what this is all about.
Well, someone said to me today this is what they do, so they'll hit you a couple of times and then things will settle down. So I guess that has to be the hope from here on in. Certainly I think you'll see some more diplomatic language. I think that's the way Scott Morrison will go. He was thanking Chinese Australians in a party room address over their reaction to the coronavirus today. He's called for the independent investigation. He'll stick to that suggestion. There's no backing away from that, but I think he'll be trying to keep the peace as well.
Yeah, and I think this is where the rest of the world, particularly other G20 countries, need to step up too and not have Australia bear much of this load, as I think we have certainly to date. I want to move to some New South Wales politics before you got to Canberra. This was your bailiwick, particularly in relation to calls today that Gladys Berejiklian, the Premier, should be sacking her Community Services Minister Gareth Ward after data was released today showing that 2/3 of children reported as being at risk of severe harm in the year to September under his watch as Minister were not seen by a caseworker.
Well, I guess Gareth Ward's been at the scene of a couple of accidents in terms of his personal life and various events where he says there was no wrongdoing. This is always a difficult portfolio that you can never do enough. I don't know the specifics around this, but he is vulnerable because of those incidents, such as when he was walking around an apartment block naked. I think he said he was sleepwalking. that any sort of fall down in this area where they put billions of dollars, he'll be seen not to have acted competently. And I think there's a sign when there are these misdemeanours by Gladys Berejiklian's ministers. She's been reluctant to act. She's got rid of one of her more faithful lieutenants in Don Harwin. She's now seen Constance and Barilaro say they were going federal and now they're not. Gareth Ward's getting a bit of heat. She's just got a lot of problems with her cabinet. And I think, you know, a reshuffle's in order, quite frankly.
Yeah, and I don't think anyone was out there reporting too widely on Gareth Ward and the personal circumstances of a couple of events there until it's impacted his portfolio, and I think that's the real sensitivity here. His previous minister, she was pretty phenomenal, Prue Goward. She turned the tables on a lot of these issues, and I think there would be many people in New South Wales who don't want to go back to the pre-Goward days, and if it's falling asleep on his watch, then he needs to wake up. Maybe it's too early for a bit of mirth, I thought, watching Question Time today, because we saw the Deputy Prime Minister, the Federal Nationals leader, make some jokes about text messages that you had out there in the media. He was making light of them today in the chamber. I don't know that John Barilaro would think it was that funny. Let's have a listen.
How important it is to receive texts. How important it is to receive text, no matter where you are, Mr Speaker, whether it's in regional New South Wales, Mr Speaker, from someone's farm, Mr Speaker, if you want to send a text to somebody, it's so important that you can both send a text and, Mr Speaker, indeed share it with somebody, Mr Speaker. And I know the value of that, and I'm sure that all members in this House understand the value of being able to send, receive and indeed share texts.
Been down there in the chamber with me, as you know, many times, and what can be mirthful and witty in that chamber when it's retailed out tonight on a TV program like this. It looks a bit arrogant sometimes, it looks a bit cocky, and I don't know that his colleagues in New South Wales would take it in good stride. I certainly don't think the National Party members would necessarily take it in good stride tonight. What's your judgment?
Well, when I watched it, I thought it was a bit of fun, but you're right in terms of a lot of sensitivities in the Nationals at the moment. They're very lucky because of COVID-19. There's not a New South Wales Nationals conference, which both the Deputy Premier and Deputy Prime Minister would usually attend. That was scheduled for Port Macquarie in about 2 months' time, but that seems to be McCormack's way of dealing with these things. I mean, Christian Porter thought it was very funny. When Barnaby Joyce had that failed leadership spill against him, McCormack was going on about the Otis Group in Question Time and Labor divisions over coal, etc. And McCormack said, fancy instability in a political party. So that seems to be his tactic. Does it make him look more of a clown than a leader? I don't know. Harmless to me.
Yeah, it's different between making light and looking like a lightweight, and I just think it's a fine line. And as I say, that when you're in the cauldron in that chamber at the time, Question Time can get ahead of steam. That just doesn't retail well necessarily outside the room. So others will judge that tomorrow, I'm sure. Andrew Cornell, thanks very much for your time.
Thanks, Peter.